I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Mark Metry. Mark is a 24-year-old entrepreneur, author, creator, mental health advocate, coach, teacher, keynote speaker, and podcast host. He's interviewed over 300 top leaders around the world, from billionaires, philanthropists, neuroscientists, professional athletes. His Humans 2.0 podcast has been placed in the top 21 growing podcasts you must listen to. In your words, what's the difference between being shy, socially anxious, and an introvert? Because I think you've been all three, right?
First off, Lan, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say, if I wasn't a speaker, my video would totally be off right now. In terms of the difference and in terms of opening this conversation, to be honest with you, I don't really believe that our society in general has enough awareness to even distinguish what these things are. And what I mean by that is, I remember when I was young, when I was like 16, I discovered the whole Myers-Briggs personality test. I'm like, oh my God, I'm an introvert, or I'm an INFJ, or I'm this. And then I these other labels. And I think for a lot of people, they're not necessarily sure. And really, it's become a colloquial word where it's like, hey, I think I'm that. I fit into that group. And so I think when it comes to distinguishing what's the difference, I agree with everything that you said in terms of, if you're an introvert, all that means is, at least in a psychology definition, your brain has a tendency to just focus more inward. And when it comes to being shy, when it comes to being socially anxious, being shy is a totally normal and natural human emotion. For example, I have a 2-year-old niece. And one of the things that I'll notice is that if somebody new comes into the room or the situation, she'll maybe stand back a little bit. She'll watch them. She'll be a little bit more observant. She won't necessarily talk that much. But then after about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, she gets the gist and is, oh, this is someone who can't really hurt me, or I'm in a safe location, and that shyness goes away. Whereas when it comes to social anxiety, people can get socially anxious. Everyone can get socially anxious, right? If you take the most confident person in the room and you tell them hey, I want you to go speak at a conference to Elon Musk and a group of 10,000 rocket scientists, and you don't know anything about rocket scientists, you're going to be very anxious regardless if you're the most confident person in the world. But people who have social anxiety, a lot of the times what this looks like is somewhere usually between the ages of 8 to 13, there was some sort of a social trauma where maybe a certain conflict happened with their friend group or with their family or with their community. And a lot of the times that really psychologically scars somebody to the point where there's a part of your nervous system that is, you're like, oh, it's about to happen again. And
pause for a second, sure. Because in your book, you talk about how you started off as an introvert, you went to a new school, and then you started becoming shy, and then it turned into being socially anxious. Can you talk about your personal experience and your kind of journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I guess I was an introvert. I think I was just a completely normal kid because introverts are normal. But for me, really around second grade, there was this period where my family and I, we moved from the inner city to a very small town. And I live here in Massachusetts. And I basically moved to this new town. It has 5,000 to 6,000 people in it. And what's really interesting is that this was post 9/11 in America. And my parents come from Egypt. I'm Middle Eastern. And then also what was interesting is that in this small town, there was zero racial diversity. So basically, I show up to the school and I'm the only person who physically looks different than everybody else. And then you combine it with anyone else who's Middle Eastern or Arab at that time, there's a tremendous amount of hatred. And so basically, I'm this little kid. I show up to a school and people are making fun of me. I'm being discriminated against based on my skin color, from students to teachers, and really just created the onset of my social anxiety. And a lot of the times people I talk to, that's usually how it happens. Social anxiety, it's not like this random thing that you just wake up one day and you're like, oh, wow, I think I caught social anxiety yesterday. No, it is a deep-seated thing that often comes from your childhood. And if you're like a lot of people, a lot of the times your brain tries to disassociate and your brain tries to forget that these things happen to cope with them. And so a lot of times people who experience social anxiety, they face some form of discrimination, they face some form of bullying, physical, emotional, other forms of abuse. They've maybe moved around a lot. They didn't really establish a friend group. And so for me, that was really the biggest factor for social anxiety, if that makes sense.
In your book, you mentioned that at age 19, you had a conversation with a waitress and how it was the first time in your life that you were in a social situation and you were actually able to say what you wanted to say without getting a panic attack. So tell us more about that situation, and how did you move from being socially anxious where you were terrified of just having a conversation with someone to you're 19 now and you had this pivotal moment where you're able to talk to this waitress. What did you do in between to shift?
Yeah, for sure. So just for context, when I was about 18, I go off to college and I basically realized that social anxiety and mental health is real. And it's basically the first time in my life where I'm like, wow, maybe I'm not just stupid or I'm not smart enough to be able to not talk to people. Maybe I have this thing in my brain called social anxiety. And so when I realized that, at first I tried to get out of it. So I tried to challenge myself to make new friends and to meet people. And that just epically failed. Every time I would try to talk to someone or make friends, my brain would just get so stressed out. And I would feel like there's some part of me holding me back. And so that basically led me to really the darkest area of my life where I really became depressed for the first time. And I was basically like, oh crap, I'm going to be stuck like this for the rest of my life. Then I started to use alcohol and food to deal with my emotions. Next thing I knew, I was obese. My social anxiety went to social isolation. I couldn't go to sleep at night. I had insomnia. And I was even like suicidal for a period of time. And all throughout that period, I didn't really know what to do. And so for me, getting out of that, one of the most basic things that I started doing was I just started to be like, hey, how can I lose weight? And that involves me changing my diet. And so basically, I changed my diet. And next thing I know, I start to sleep a little bit better. I start to exercise a little bit better. I start to read some books. I start to practice mindfulness meditation, journaling. And then eventually, I start doing this thing called exposure therapy. And then eventually, I was out at a restaurant with my sister. And literally, like you said, for the first time in my life, like right before someone's about to talk to me, this like all of a sudden it feels like my mind goes blank. And then I just start sweating. And then my heartbeat starts to increase. And maybe I start tapping my foot. All of a sudden that just didn't happen. And all of a sudden I was like, hey, can I get the steak with this and that? And I remember when that happened, it really confused me. I was just like, wait, how did this happen? And so it was a lot of progress. It was months of doing certain things, but that's a general path, at least in the short form of what happened.
Can you go a little bit deeper in terms of what do you call it? I didn't pick that up. The therapy that you did?
Exposure therapy.
Can you go over that a little bit more?
Sure.
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, so this is something that you can do by yourself. What I would say though, as a disclaimer, is if you're just working on your social anxiety for the first time, I highly do not recommend you start off with this, because when I first realized I had social anxiety, this is what I tried to do. I tried to expose myself, and it actually made me more depressed and more stressed. And so you don't want to do this first. Definitely not. You want to work on some other things that I mentioned beforehand, and then that'll help you. And so basically what exposure therapy is, you basically break down social anxiety into the 4 layers. And so the 4 layers of social anxiety are your physical appearance. So people will get socially anxious around their physical appearance, whether it's their skin color like me, or the clothes you wear, or your body size, so on and so forth. The second one is people will get socially anxious around their social skills. They'll feel like they don't really know how to introduce themselves. They don't really know how to have a conversation. They don't really know how to small talk. Number 3 is people will get socially anxious around the signs of anxiety itself. So this is a big one that a lot of people don't realize, is that if you're in a conversation and, your mind goes blank and you don't know what to say, or all of a sudden you start blushing or you start sweating, then there's a different part of your mind that's, oh, wait, people know that you're nervous. People know that you're sweating. So that creates another layer of social anxiety. And the fourth layer of social anxiety, and people usually have one, it's usually a combination of all of these. Then people will be socially anxious around their entire personality and their character of just who they are as a person. Like they're not good enough, or they lack the talent. And so basically what you do is you break apart these layers, and you do this for yourself. And then basically what you do is you systematically and incrementally expose yourself to these things, right? So I can give two different examples. So in terms of like my social skills and talking to people, one of the things that I did was, instead of challenging myself to just go up to random strangers and talk to them, what I would do is I would go in my journal and I'd write down, Mark, challenge yourself to ask 5 people what time it is today. And so what I would do is I'd go out and I'd ask people, hey, I'm so sorry to bother you. I forgot my phone. Do you mind telling me what's the time? And a lot of the times you break it down in like the easiest, most incremental way, and it makes it a lot easier. And then you work your way up, and then you might ask people, hey, what's the time? And how do you get directions to somewhere else? And then, so that's an example where you can expose yourself based on your social skills and just anxiety in general. And then, for example, with your physical appearance. So one of the things for me that I have is, so this small town that I grew up in, it was a pretty wealthy area. And so all the kids around me, all their parents had money. My parents and I were poor. And so basically they would wear like the newest clothes, and they would get great clothes, whereas I would just wear the same clothes to school again and again and again. And so for me, what I realized is, wow, I have this layer of social anxiety around my physical appearance and specifically my clothes. And so what I would do is I would start wearing different, very unique clothes. And it got to a point where, what I would do is I would literally try to find the most outrageous outfit, where I would get like a pink cowboy hat, and I would wear like a tight pink neon shirt with sparkles and like tight pink shorts. And I would literally go to the most crowded area where I could find a mall. And as I'm walking, literally every single person is looking at you. And when you have social anxiety, your brain is telling you, even if you're not wearing that crazy outfit, that everyone is already staring at you and maybe making fun of you. And so when you enter in this environment, and again, I didn't dive into this right away. I did months and a year of working on social anxiety through other means to get me to that point where I could do that. But when you place yourself in that situation, your brain basically starts to learn, and it starts to decondition itself from that layer of social anxiety. And basically, you like this whole problem of social anxiety, you pull it apart into layers. You do exposure therapy on each one. And then if you're doing some other therapeutic and some other things that can help restore your brain and rewire your mind, this is how you can go from social anxiety controlling 95% of your life to it really only being there like only 5% in the background of your mind. And so I highly recommend that. And then again, just a quick disclaimer, I do not recommend people do exposure therapy if they're just starting to work on their social anxiety, because you're not really going to be able to, and it may make things worse. And so I recommend doing it after a year of like really getting on like a plan of action and a healing plan. So that's what I recommend.
It's so funny with your story, because you actually made me remember something that I had buried in my mind from a long time ago. I don't consider myself shy now, but I consider myself an introvert, where I'd rather be alone than around people in general, especially strangers. But I believe I was shyer when I was younger. Like in my 20s, I remember I went on this Texas Hold'em trip with one of my friends who we graduated from Stanford together, and he'd almost died the year prior. And I remember being with him and just thinking, I was so afraid of talking to people, right? And so I was talking to one of his friends that was an active extrovert, and he was like, all you need to do is just everywhere you go, talk to people. And so I was like, that sounds so stupid. But I ended up doing that. Like everywhere I went, if I was at the gas station or liquor store, I just started sparking conversations with people. And it was really uncomfortable and painful in the beginning. But the more I did it, it just got easier. And I think I grew out of my shyness through that activity of just talking to people and confronting my fear. So Patricia Maldonado has a question. Did you do all of this on your own, or did you have the support guidance of a healthcare professional when you went through this exposure therapy?
That's a great question. I'm trying to figure out a way to answer this question. So what I would say is that, in all honesty, and again, I've never given medical advice. I don't plan to always seek a healthcare professional for medical advice, so on and so forth. I honestly, when I was going through this, I remember going to a doctor, seeing some people. And to be honest with you, I didn't really feel like I got the help that I needed. And if anything, I felt I was just given something that was not really for me, but it's just widespread given out. And so for me, what I was like, when I experienced that is, hey, if I'm not going to go with the more traditional treatment, then I need to really take what I'm doing seriously. And so for me, when I went to a doctor and I was like, I'm probably going to decide to not do what they tell me to do, then I have to take really my own education and my own healing into my own hands in terms of my responsibility for my own education. So maybe talking to different kinds of doctors, talking to maybe other people in the field. And so for me, I very much didn't do it by myself, but I also didn't necessarily seek the advice of a healthcare professional. It really wasn't maybe until a year later where I saw like a psychotherapist, for example. But that's really the only case that I can think of to answer that question.
In the book, you mentioned that people who are shy or socially anxious are often mislabeled as introverts, and that this mislabeling has done a lot of harm. Can you go a little bit deeper with this? Because as a person who considers myself an introvert, I find that many of us mislabeled as shy when a lot of us, some are, but a lot of us aren't. Can you go a little bit more and why that's harmful?
Yeah, so I remember growing up, and really anytime anybody met me for the first time, they would always say, oh, Mark is shy, or he's quiet, or he's an introvert, or he's this, or he's that. And as a kid, when you don't really know who you are, you just pick up whatever people believe about you as yourself. And so here I am going through life and I'm like, wow, I need to like be introverted and so on and so forth. But then, for example, I would face these other scenarios where, for example, when I was a kid, I had like a YouTube channel and I was like so deep into video games. And then I would realize that like when I was in the middle of a game talking to my friends, I was not shy at all. And so all of a sudden I was like, wait, like who really am I? Like, I don't really fit into this box. And so I think it does a lot of people harm because one, it fits them in a box that may mislabel them, but then they pick that up as, oh, this is life, and they live it in this box. But then I think number two is that, like, I honestly believe that being shy for some people is a coping mechanism for social anxiety. So someone who has social anxiety where it's very stressful to deal with people and your brain is like running these simulations of how it thinks other people are perceiving you and then applying meaning to those and then creating your reality. For a lot of people, they would just rather not do that and just say, hey, I'm a shy person. I'm just going to go sit in the back and just not even deal with people. So I think for a lot of people, it becomes this, it really becomes like a coping mechanism. And when you're a kid and you go through this, it's very challenging. And that's why, for example, like I honestly hate it. And again, if you do this, that's totally fine. No judgment. But I hate when people ask, oh, are you shy? Or are you a little bit shy? Because the reality is that someone who doesn't have social anxiety, they may not think that's a big deal. But for someone who does have social anxiety and you say that, that's going to be a huge trigger for them. And that's going to mess them up mentally. And I think that's a huge issue because every time as a kid, when I heard that, it was always so confusing, but it almost just put me in this box. And when you get put in this box, it's very hard to climb out of that by yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. In your book, you talk about social anxiety and shyness and how it can impact development. For you getting out of that bubble, you were able to do things like write a book, be on a top podcast. You wouldn't have been able to do those things if you had remained shy and socially anxious. As an introvert, I don't really feel the need to change. I don't feel like it's harmed me at any way. You know what I mean? Why would someone who's socially anxious or shy want to change? Because as an introvert, I don't see the need to change myself.
Sure. So for me, it's just like when you face social anxiety every day of your life and you have this certain, let's say, persona that you create of being shy, every single day in your head, you're not being yourself and you're pretending to be somebody else. And if you're in that scenario, that's how you become depressed. That's how a lot of different issues occur. And I think for a lot of times, people who have social anxiety, they wish they could change. However, due to their brain firing the same neurotransmitters every day for the last 10 years of their life, they are literally unable to change because their brain has created like a biochemical prison that I would create of even if you want to say something different or even if you want to change, your brain is not going to let you. And so I don't necessarily know how I could answer that question in terms of why would somebody change other than they already know they want to change. But it's just a matter of how do you approach that, because they're probably trying to change every single day. People with social anxiety, literally every single day, they're trying to be confident, they're trying to be themselves. And then literally every single day, they're like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I messed this up. What are people going to think of me? And so I bet you that they already want to change. I don't really think it's a question of should they change or not. I think that's up to each person. But the question is, how do you actually change given the fact that it's almost impossible? And just for an example, in terms of what you said about social anxiety impacting your self-esteem, one of the reasons why I wrote my book and I center a lot of my work around this is because a lot of people on the outside who think, oh, they're just shy. They're just a little socially anxious, or, oh, they'll grow out of it. A lot of times what they don't understand is that social anxiety is the third most common mental health issue in America. And out of all the mental health issues, it is the most correlated with social isolation, substance abuse, and suicide, which was shown in a Harvard meta-analysis study. And so for a lot of people, social anxiety, it's not necessarily like one thing that they don't like about themselves. It is literally a virus that gets planted into their brain at such a deep level that then takes down their self-esteem, takes down their social groups, takes down their habits, takes down their mental health. And then it really takes them on a terrible road that I almost ended up not really being here on planet Earth. And so it's a very serious issue. And yet a lot of people some of them who even have it or who don't and look on the outside, like, oh, you're just a little shy, or, oh, you're just a little socially anxious. And it has huge impacts on your psychology.
I'm wondering if it's gotten worse with COVID and the pandemic and social isolation. Do you think I don't know, I haven't really looked at the studies, but it has had from your conversations.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know about any studies that have been done with social anxiety and the pandemic, not that I know of, but I would say this. I think it's been a very illuminating time, because I think when you at least during the beginning of quarantine, when you just stay in your house for a month, I think that gave some people with social anxiety comfort that they needed. But I think it also created a lot of awareness, and it taught people of, wait, why do I act in this certain way around these certain people? But then when I'm at my house, I act in a different way. And then I also think social anxiety, it's also very prevalent, not just in person, but also virtual. So I think like the ability to just like sit down on Zoom and go through 10 meetings a day, that can even trigger more social anxiety for a lot of people. And so my estimate would say, if I had to give my anecdotal story about that, I think that some people have grown their awareness and have actually used this time to improve and start to recover from social anxiety. Whereas I feel like probably the bigger majority of people are unfortunately, like, this is a scar for them. This is a trauma. And I think it was a trauma for a lot of us, myself included. And so for me, my hope is just, I hope they didn't fall too deep down the hole to where they're not even saying, hey, let me try to deal with this. They're just like, you know what? Screw it. Let me stay in my house for the rest of my life. I don't want to have friends. I don't want to talk to people. Because yeah, you could do that for a year, for 2 years, but you need that. It's essential for, at least if you're a human. I don't know about aliens, but you really need that.
Go back to what you said about being socially anxious can contribute to other things like suicide, depression, etc. And I'm thinking about some of the folks who are on this call who have kids or teenagers or elementary school students who might fall on the social anxious to shy. What can we do to help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I honestly ask myself that question every day. So I think one of the biggest things I look back on as a kid that really sucks about this is that, like I said, social anxiety, it's a virus. And so the same way that every virus works is that it starts off in one area, but then it spreads to every other area, right? So for me, my social anxiety really started in school. But then what happens is that I was in like a different community, a part of my like being Egyptian. Eventually, social anxiety made its way to that community. And then eventually it also turned into just every single relationship in my entire life, including my parents and my family. And then I started to be socially anxious around my family. And this is a very common case. And so here's what I would say. I would say if you're a kid, and I guess it's hard because of quarantine now, but if your kid is around the ages of 9 to 13, and all of a sudden you realize, all of a sudden they're just like got sucked into their shell, like they were acting a certain way. And maybe it's hard if you see them every day to tell, but that's basically your cue that something is basically happening here. And I say that because part of the reason why social anxiety is so difficult is it's almost like breaking a leg. So if you break a leg, our society has this entire system where you go to a doctor, they give you a cast, they give you crutches. Next month you come back, they give you a different kind of a cast, and they give you physical therapy. The same thing happens with social anxiety, but it's almost a tear in your brain. And so a lot of the times when someone is going through this, they may not even know, but oftentimes like the best analogy is like a turtle just sucking itself back into its shell. So if you notice that, your kid is going through, this is like the injury, this is the scar that happens. And if this is something that is neglected or it's not really dealt with for 10 years, then that's what becomes capital S social anxiety. And so the key to understand is that you're in a really pivotal moment where you can change the rest of their life. I'll tell you what doesn't work. What doesn't work is like forcing your kids to do something. I think a lot of times, and again, it's very hard. I'm not a parent, so I can only say so much about this and getting your kids to do certain things. I think forcing your kids to do something, even you have good intentions for them, is great. Like, for example, I remember at every social event or every social gathering with my family would always tell me like, hey, Mark, you can talk to people, or hey, Mark, don't be afraid or don't be shy to talk to people. And obviously when I'm a kid, like, of course I know that, but just because I know it doesn't mean it actually makes a difference. And so a lot of times my parents would sometimes push me and they tell me to talk to people and they tell me to do this. But a lot of times it just wasn't really done in the right way. And it just made my social anxiety get even worse. And so a lot of the times what I recommend is you have to be on the same team as your kid. Okay. And so for example, what this could look like is I don't know, you're going to your kid's birthday party. Okay. They're 12. And what you can do is if your kid is developing social anxiety or they're right in the middle of this, when they first get to the party, you can tell them like, hey, you can stay around me. You can hang out with me for a little bit. And a lot of times what you'll do is you can be a safety for this person. And so what you can say is, hey, feel free to hang out with me and you can sit next to them. And then what you can do is you can start working on things like a team. So you can maybe try to nudge them like, hey, do you want to say hi to your friend Kevin over there? And again, you don't want to pressure them or force them because, again, just imagine you have a broken leg and then telling someone, hey, you have to go run a marathon. Oh, it's all in your head. Just get out of it. That doesn't work. And so what you want to do is you want to be a sort of a safety zone for your kid. And you want to just help nudge them and say, hey, do you want to do that? Do you want to do this? And then what you'll often notice is that if you can do that correctly, then they may go talk to their friend Kevin and then they may come back to you. And they may go talk to their other friend, they may come back to you. And then maybe about the third or fourth or fifth time, they're not even around you and they're just go hang out with their friends. And so that's like a way where you can incrementally show them that in social situations, they can be safe, whether that's with you, your mom, or whatever parent is the best. And so that's great. The other thing that I would say too is that I'm sure this might sound cheesy, but you really want to show unconditional love. So I think for me, one of the best things that my parents ever told me, I'm sure they told me this before, but I just maybe didn't remember. But it was a time when I was about 18 and I was going through all this stuff. And I remember my parents, they basically sat me down and they told me, Mark, no matter what you do, no matter who you become, no matter how much you mess up, we will always love you and you will always be our son. Unfortunately, there's many households and parents that don't really work the same way. And so when you're living in an environment as a kid where you're like, if I do something that my parents told me not to do, I'm basically going to hide that from them. And when you hide that, that creates more social anxiety. But if you create an environment where even if your kids messed up, they did something they didn't do, but you create this dynamic with them where you're truly like you're their best friend and you're on the same team, then that's going to create an understanding of like, even if they mess up or if they do something that you told them not to do, or is against your culture or is against your religion, and you create this sort of transparent environment, that is going to really help them when it comes to their social anxiety. And, those are some ways to do it. And then if people just search my name, Mark Metry, and parents and stuff like that, I've written other resources. I've done podcasts about this too, for people who are more interested in this as well.
Yeah, I'll add that link as well. So I love that whole notion of unconditional love and how that's important in terms of how you can help. I thought that was really good advice. Tim, do you want to unmute? And if you want me to read the question, I can too. Do you want to unmute and ask your question to Mark?
Hey, Mark, heard you on some podcasts. I'm glad to be here. This question of labeling, it used to be once you become self-aware, and as you get older, as I am, you're senior by a few decades, it seems I know who I am. Or so since I know who I am, I'm not going to change. People need to accept me. But I've also learned that labels, they stunt your growth, meaning self-awareness is an excellent tool. So I was wondering how you feel about labels and those labels, because it attacks the kids, but we do it in the workplace too. An introvert in a very extroverted society, whether it be academics or in corporate America. How do you view labels now?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I would say is basically this. When it comes to other people using different labels, that's one thing. But when it comes to labels in general, what I honestly believe now is that for many of us, we would rather live within a label than to truly show ourselves to the world. And a lot of the times it almost becomes like armor, right? So whether it's the label of, hey, I'm like this entrepreneur, or I'm like this person, I'm like this speaker, I think a lot of times we create these labels, good or bad, where we can almost attach to them like a life raft rather than tell people the more deeper parts where we're a little bit more insecure about. And in terms of self-awareness, what I think is that self-awareness is always an ongoing thing. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where someone is fully woke yet or anything like that. I think it's this constant thing. And I think for me, one of the biggest ways where I not only increase my self-awareness, but also drop labels is really through mindfulness meditation. And I say that because for me, when I first started to practice meditation, I remember for the first 2 weeks, it was probably like the most confusing time in my life, because basically mindfulness meditation, all you do is you sit down and you close your eyes, and all you do is just focus on the present moment by just feeling the physical sensation of your breath flow in and out of your body, because that's the only thing that exists right now. And like when you do this, your brain is going to think it's going to send you all kinds of different thoughts. And if you meditate long enough, what you're going to start to realize is that there's going to be parts of your deep psychology that has attached to these certain labels where it's going to think certain thoughts. And what I mean by that is I remember there were times where I'd be sitting down meditating and my brain would think something. And I would just be, wait, what was that? Like, I don't necessarily believe in that thought, but why did my brain think that? Who's really doing the thinking here? And then I take a step back and I'm like, wow, my perception of who I am and myself is like this onion that has layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. And a lot of times I've built up these layers as really defense mechanisms to protect me in moments of my life. But when you sit down and you meditate and you almost see these layers appear in front of you by just letting them think and letting you sit there in the present moment, it really starts to create distinguishing factor between, oh, a lot of us, the average person, I think, has 65,000 thoughts a day. And these are like these labels coming to life. But when you sit there and you provide an environment where you're mindful and you're in the present moment and you see all these thoughts almost come to life, you're much more able to distinguish between, hey, that's the real me versus, oh, that is some other layer, label, defense mechanism that's somewhere in my psyche that just came out automatically. And I don't know if that answers your question, Tim, but I think that's how I would respond.
Yeah, and some comments in the chat. Gurisia, I wish my parents had given me that kind of support when I was going through that phase, but at least I know now and I will be there for my kid. And then David says, the healing power of unconditional love and meditation has transformed my life. I'm looking at the LinkedIn and folks who are in the live stream, and there seems to be a lot of extroverts on the call. As an extrovert, what are things that you can do to support the introverts in your life? Or introverts or people who are shy?
Yeah, I'm an extrovert, so I'm sure other people have more experience with that. But what could I think? It depends. So it depends what your relationship is with the person. But I think for me, like what I do is I always just try to be mindful. And I guess it's easy for me because I used to be that kind of person. So like whenever I talk to someone, I always use certain words like, hey, no pressure. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I give them the space. And I also tell them about my own insecurities. I think one of the great ways, just as a leader in general, to get people to open up is, I think, sharing some insecurity for you. Because I think a lot of times people with social anxiety, there's this cognitive bias that is called the spotlight effect, to where you think that nobody else has any other problems and they don't get anxious except for you, when in reality, you're experiencing this 4-dimensional, 3-dimensional reality, but then you can only see people on the outside and you don't really know what's happening on the inside. And so I think like sharing about your own insecurities, and then that can create a space to where other people can do the same. And then just like making sure that you're creating a safe space by not putting pressure on people, by not forcing anybody to do something they don't want to do. And then I think also too, just like providing the path of least resistance as well, right? So for example, if people don't want to unmute their mics on Zoom, then they can type a question in the chat. And like, for example, like I put in the chat, I don't know if you guys can see it, as I said, ask the question with a smiley face, because I can guarantee you that in this Zoom call, there's probably at least one person who is like me, which was like me every day of I had so many questions, but then I would just never ask them. And then I would just let the time go, oh, should I do it? Should I do it? Should I do it? But then it's just, no, it's just easier to stop. So I just wanted to type that in the chat to give anybody in this room permission, even if we have time, if they want to ask that question, to just do something differently. Maybe if they've never asked a question in this kind of a public group setting. Now's your push, go.
I love that. Twee, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to ask?
I can ask. Okay, Mark, you were saying earlier, if a person has social anxiety, but that person knows like they're not being their true self, it may lead to depression. So what would you recommend that person to do in terms of breaking this type of conditioning? You mentioned earlier mindful meditation. Would that help?
Yeah, so I definitely think mindfulness meditation would help. And yeah, you know, what's interesting is that a lot of the science and a lot of the research I'm looking at in terms of depression is really starting to be formed around this idea of neuroplasticity. And basically what this means is that if your brain has not changed and it's operating the same way it's always operated for the last 10 years, then depression is going to be the natural side effect. And so what you really have to start asking yourself is, what situations can I do that can increase neuroplasticity, which is basically my brain's ability to mold and shape itself and grow new brain cells. And so I'm sure if you Google that, you'll find 1,000 things. But yeah, I definitely think mindfulness meditation is huge. I think your diet is huge. I think a lot of the times diet is put under this category of exercise and losing weight. But a lot of the times, like, your brain is actually what's consuming most of your food. And at the end of the day, it's, do you want your brain cells to be made out of Oreos and Kool-Aid and bread? Or do you want your brain cells to be made out of the raw ingredients your brain needs to generate new brain cells, which is largely dietary fat and different minerals and nutrients that you can also look up. And so I think those two sets and that kind of category of neuroplasticity is huge in terms of depression in general.
Awesome.
If that answers your question to me.
Yeah, so we're up for time. Put this in gallery mode. If you can, turn on your videos, turn on your audio, because we need to give Mark a big round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you,
so
Lance.
much, Mark. Really appreciate you. That was so powerful. In the comments too, we have a lot of people who are really appreciative of this, and you've helped a lot of people today. Mark, any final words?
Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for the community that you've created, and that's definitely something special. And thank you guys all for showing up. This was awesome. Thank you for making my Tuesday.
Thanks, Mark. Take care. Woo-hoo!